Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we are diving into one of the most talked about and ambitious ideas in India's political landscape: one nation, one election. On Tuesday, December 17th, that's today, the government officially took its first concrete step towards implementing this long debated reform. Law Minister Arjun Ram Meghwal introduced two significant bills in the Lok Sabha. The first bill, of course, was the Constitution Amendment Bill to synchronize the terms of Lok Sabha as well as the state legislative assemblies vis-a-vis the elections. The second bill was a consequential bill to amend the relevant acts of the UTs and also for the National Capital Territory of Delhi. By UTs, I mean those UTs which have a state legislative assembly, or rather a legislative assembly. So this bill was there to amend the relevant acts to enable simultaneous polls there as well. Now this is not just about elections. It's about changing the very rhythm of how democracy operates in our country. But what does one nation, one election really mean? What are the steps being taken? And most importantly, what impact will it have on governance, on resources, and on us, the voter? So stay with me as we break this down step by step, simplifying the complexities, exploring the facts, and of course, understanding the debate surrounding this monumental move. So let's get started on our discussion on the 129th Constitutional Amendment Bill 2024. But first up, what exactly is the current situation in our country with respect to elections? So the Lok Sabha election cycle runs from currently 2024 to 2029. Now we'll have next elections in 2029, and then if things are all okay, the next elections are scheduled to take place in 2034, so on and so forth, a 5-year tenure. However, for the state legislative assemblies, this varies from one state to another. For example, if you take UP as a case, their election cycle is 2022 to 2027. This means we are going to have elections in UP in 2027, next elections in 2032, so on and so forth. Similarly, for Tamil Nadu, this cycle is 2021-2026. For states like, say, Karnataka or Mizoram, this cycle is 2023-2028. And then for states like Andhra Pradesh and Jharkhand, which witnessed elections recently, this cycle is 2024-2029, which synchronizes with the Lok Sabha. So we can observe that every year, in few months, you are going to experience elections in some corner of the country. And hence, what we wanted was to have simultaneous elections, or one nation, one election. Now the big question, why is it required? What's the need for simultaneous elections? So first up is the high election cost. Of course, polls are like lavish weddings. Running elections every few months is like hosting back-to-back destination weddings. You'll end up broke before the third round of Bharat. From government coffers to party funds, everyone ends up poorer than an engineering student at the end of the month. Separate elections mean double spending, bribing the voters, campaigns, rallies, posters, and whatnot. So it's no cheap affair. One grand poll once in 5 years will save us from the recurring EMI of democracy. And then it's, of course, a time-consuming process, the never-ending election fest. So this election commission must feel like they are stuck in a never-ending IPL season, planning booths, handling ballots, managing candidates who think they are some rock stars. It's exhausting. And then once elections are conducted, responding to the so-called EVM frauds. Of course, they have their plates full. How can you expect the government to work when half their time is spent fighting elections? And then we have the model code of conduct disruption, the supposed pause button on development. MCC coming into effect means goodbye for governance. New roads, a pause. Projects, a pause. Even opening a park bench gets postponed because elections chal rahe hain. The politicians can't even inaugurate street lights for a photo op. Crucial governance is stuck on snooze mode. Simultaneous elections mean fewer MCC breaks and more actual work being done in the country. And then the impact on public life. Schools turn polling booths and then the chaos ensues. Elections turn everything upside down. Schools close, teachers get hired as polling officers, and traffic jams look like they are sponsored by political parties. Even our Sunday walks become an obstacle course of posters, banners, and then loudspeakers blasting slogans. Once is enough, I believe, right? And then manpower development. So, of course, election duty is where efficiency goes to die. Every election is like calling your best players off the pitch. Police, officials, and administrators all get reassigned to election duty. Their actual work piles up like some undone dishes in the kitchen. One-time elections mean they can do their job without repeatedly being summoned to babysit those EVMs. And then, of course, the administrative burden. Too many polls, of course, too many problems. See, the government machinery gets so overloaded. The burden is so much that it sometimes also feels like you're asking your Pentium 4 processor to play some Cyberpunk 2077. The officers juggle logistics, security, and protocols, and by the time one election ends, another begins. A single election cycle will let the system reboot and possibly function smoothly. At least that's what we hope for. And then, of course, preserving regional party relevance. So local issues won't get lost in the noise. So if you're worried about regional parties, please don't be, because simultaneous elections won't drown out local voices. In fact, they are going to sharpen the focus. While national parties talk about the moon, regional parties will remind you that your gully's broken water pipe is still leaking. It's a win-win. I mean, you have the national plans, of course, and you have those regional priorities. And to sum it up, ultimately, it is what gives us better democracy. So yes, a win-win for all. So the bottom line is that running elections all the time is like hosting the big fat Indian wedding every weekend. It's loud, it's chaotic, and of course, extremely expensive. Simultaneous elections are the perfect one-shot vaccine to save money, right? To save, of course, time and energy while letting the country get back to actual governance. Now, coming to the high-level committee that was set up for reporting the findings. So, the high-level committee, which was chaired by former President Ramnath Kovind, was constituted last year in the month of September, and the task allocated to it was to assess the feasibility of this entire concept of one nation, one election or simultaneous elections for the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assemblies. The committee conducted extensive consultations and received nationwide feedback to analyze the benefits and challenges of this reform and then submitted its report accordingly. In fact, the committee said that 80% of the people who had responded from around 21,500 responses that they gathered were in support of simultaneous elections, with the highest inputs coming from states like Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, Kerala, etc. And of course, most parties, around 32 parties, supported simultaneous elections. 15 opposed, citing some regional concern, and of course, the good old democratic challenges. What are we without those challenges, of course, right? Then, of course, the expert consultations. Majority of legal and electoral experts favored simultaneous elections to reduce disruptions and resource wastage. And then the economic impact. In fact, industry bodies like CII, FICCI, and even ASSOCHAM highlighted economic stability and reduced election costs. And then, of course, the suggestion came in the form of amendments to the constitution by adding some provisions through a phased implementation. So, the first phase was to synchronize the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assembly elections, and phase 2 would be to align the local body elections within 100 days of the national and state elections. In fact, not just this, the body also recommended that we harmonize the EPIC, the voter I-card, and of course the electoral roll, the voter list. So this can reduce errors and of course avoid duplications. And lastly, the committee also said that frequent elections cause a voter fatigue and disrupt governance, which simultaneous elections aim to resolve. So this was the idea. Now let's look into the provisions. So of course, there have been certain changes. We have seen the insertion of Article 82 capital A. Then some clauses have been added to Article 83 and Article 172, and a minor modification has been made in Article 327. Now let's try to understand all these changes step by step. So first up, we have now gone ahead to define simultaneous elections. In fact, Article 82 capital A clause 4 now defines what's the meaning of simultaneous elections. This means that elections to the Lok Sabha or the House of the People and the state legislative assemblies will be held together. So these general elections, when conducted at the same time, are called simultaneous elections. The definition mentioned here clearly. Then coming to the role of the Election Commission as well as the presidential order. Now, under the same article 82 capital A, but clause 3, what does this say? So under this article, ECI is tasked with conducting the elections both to the Lok Sabha as well as the legislative assemblies. Of course, this has to happen. Now, what happens if the elections to a state legislative assembly cannot be conducted along with, say, Lok Sabha elections? So don't worry, the same article, clause 5. Now I'm mentioning all these clauses. I don't see a need to mug up all these clauses. Anyway, so as I was discussing, what would happen if elections to the assembly cannot be conducted along with, say, the Lok Sabha elections? ECI, the Election Commission of India, can always recommend to the President of India, and then the President can issue an order called a presidential order. And this order will declare that elections for that assembly will be held at a later date. So for example, let's assume we get simultaneous elections from 2034. Now, by any chance, if in say UP elections cannot be conducted for the state legislative assembly in 2034, then the ECI can make recommendations to the president, and the president can say, okay, we will not have elections in UP in 2034, but say some later date, maybe 2035. So this provision has also been incorporated. However, just to clarify, the clause 6 of the same article 82 capital A clause 6. Clause 6 ensures that even when the state legislative assembly elections are deferred or postponed, like the example of UP in our case, its full term will end on the same date as the Lok Sabha's full term, meaning if we assume the Lok Sabha's term to be 2034 to 2039, and by any chance election in UP was conducted in 2035, this new state legislative assembly will only get to continue till 2039 for just 4 years. Because why? We need elections to be synchronized. That's the whole point. Okay. Now coming to some changes made to Article 83. So Article 83 governs the tenure of Lok Sabha. Some clauses like clause 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 have been added. First up, there is a definition. What is called a full term? We have a definition in this particular clause. Clause 3. The full term of Lok Sabha has been defined as 5 years. 5 years from the date of its first sitting. Then we have the next clause. If the Lok Sabha is dissolved before 5 years by any chance, the remainder period is now officially being termed as the unexpired term. So this is a new term being introduced. And why? Because clause 5 of this Article 83 is very, very important. It says that if a new Lok Sabha is elected due to early dissolution, it will only serve the remaining unexpired term. It does not get a fresh full 5-year tenure. Okay. For example, if in 2034 we have the elections and by any circumstance in 2037 we had to dissolve the Lok Sabha and we had to conduct elections for constituting new Lok Sabha. This new Lok Sabha will continue only for the remainder unexpired term. So from 2034 to full term 5 years plus 5 is how much? 2039. So the new Lok Sabha will continue only for the remainder period, 2 years, just like we have for our panchayats as well as for municipalities. Every newly elected panchayat after some premature dissolution continues only for the remainder period. That's interesting. And also, just to clarify, such new Lok Sabha that has been elected is not a continuation of an earlier one. It's a completely new body with all powers and all responsibilities. But the only limit is that its term will be limited to the remaining unexpired term. It won't get a full 5-year period. That's the only difference. For example, let's say bills that lapsed due to dissolution will not carry forward to this new Lok Sabha, as would have been the case for a full 5-year term Lok Sabha. So now we have two kinds of elections. The regular election will be termed as a general election. So if you have elections in 2034, after 5 years in 2039, after 5 years in 2044, these are all termed as regular elections or general elections. However, any election that is held if Lok Sabha is dissolved before the completion of its term, meaning elections for the unexpired term, are going to be referred to as mid-term elections. So we have two technical terms now, general elections and mid-term elections. So this is going to be the case. Now moving on to our other point at hand, which is the state legislative assemblies. So for the state legislative assemblies, we have changes done to Article 172. That's exactly the same. Similar kind of changes have been made to Article 172 for the state legislative assemblies. For example, there is one clause 1A that has been added, which says that the full term of state legislative assembly is defined as how many years? Of course, 5 years from its first meeting. And then again, if the assembly is dissolved early, the remaining time would be called unexpired term, as was the case with respect to the Lok Sabha. And then a new assembly elected mid-term will only serve for the remaining unexpired term and not a fresh 5-year period. In fact, this is how they are going to always be in sync, the elections, because we will make sure that if by any chance dissolution takes place, the newly elected Lok Sabha or the assembly does not get to enjoy full 5 years, but only gets elected for the remainder period through an election which would be referred to as what? Mid-term election. Right? So just like the Lok Sabha, this assembly, the new assembly, is not a continuation of the previous assembly and has its own unique identity, but its tenure remains limited to, of course, the unexpired term. Now, one more thing. Coming to this important point, when will all this begin? How do we start this process? What's that official date? So, this official date is being referred to as appointed date. So, what is this appointed date? So, this date is the date from which we'll have the ONOE system kick in. So, again coming back to Article 82 capital A clause 1 this time. So here the President of India, our big boss, the President of India is going to issue a public notification declaring the date as the appointed date. And what date will that be? This notification will be issued on the first sitting of the Lok Sabha after general elections. This means this possibly will happen in 2029 if the government is interested in going ahead with the simultaneous elections concept. So, for instance, if the government plans to implement this after the 2029 elections, the president will declare the appointed date during the first sitting of the newly elected Lok Sabha. So this is how it's going to happen. Now, from that date onwards, very, very important. Let's assume, for example, that in 2029, once we have had the Lok Sabha elections conducted successfully in 2029, then all legislative assemblies elected mid-term will have their tenure synchronized with the Lok Sabha's full term. Meaning, the Lok Sabha's full term is 2029 to 2034. Please hear this very carefully. This would mean that the Lok Sabha's tenure is going to end in 2034. So we expect that by 2034, possibly we'll have the one nation, one election kicking in. But now comes the role of the assemblies. During this entire period from 29 to 34, if we have elections to any assembly, for example, I gave the example earlier as well with respect to states like say UP. Now UP's election cycle is 2027 to 2032. So elections will take place in UP in 2032. So once a new assembly is elected in UP in 2032, this assembly will continue only till 2034. Or let's take the example of Tamil Nadu. In Tamil Nadu, the cycle is 2026 to 2031. So a newly elected Tamil Nadu State Legislative Assembly in 2031 will continue only for how many years? 3 years, because by 2034 we'll have to synchronize all the assemblies and the Lok Sabha together. That is only if this happens in 2029, meaning the appointed date is declared as this date. If the government shifts it to 2034, then we'll have the cycle change to this period. Take the example of, say, a state like Mizoram. So Mizoram's cycle is 2023 to 28. Then next would be 28 to 33. So this means in 2033, we'll have the assembly elections for Mizoram, and this newly elected assembly will continue only till 2034, that is just 1 year. Now, of course, there might be some changes made in this provision. Why do I say this? I say this because of a very crucial factor. We are also modifying Article 327. Article 327 has been amended to include the conduct of simultaneous elections. Primarily, this would empower the Parliament to make laws for holding simultaneous elections. That's it. So how would this be? What if the remainder period is only 6 months? Should we conduct elections and waste countries' resources, or would we have something called a president's rule? These things are yet to be decided. Possibly, the Parliament can in future make laws to incorporate these aspects as well. Because of course, we would not want to have elections just for 4 months or say 7 months of government in a particular state. Because see, for panchayats as well, the time frame is at least 6 months or more. So if only 6 months remain as far as the unexpired term is concerned, no elections are to be conducted for the panchayat. So possibly for the state, this term can be increased to say 1 year, because more resources are required to conduct elections in a state assembly. So these are the provisions vis-a-vis our 129th Constitutional Amendment Bill 2024. Now, what has been the stand of our innocent opposition? So, of course, what happens when you propose a grand one nation, one election? Well, you get a big fat no served by the opposition, hot, spicy, and sprinkled with the idea of federalism. So, of course, the first query, the first concern has been that it's a violation of federalism. It's not some one size fits all in a democracy. In fact, one Congress leader, Manish Tiwari, came in swinging, saying that linking the state assemblies, the state legislative assemblies tenure with the Lok Sabha is like forcing everyone to wear the same kurta pajama, whether it fits you or not. And his punchline, this violates the principle of federal equality. So basically, states are equal constituents, not interns to the center, is the argument. In fact, TMC also mentioned this. They said that state assemblies are not subordinate to the center. This is a democracy, not some parent-teacher meeting. If articles were a family, then maybe this would not be appropriate. And then came Shiv Sena, reminding everyone that India is a union of states, not a unit of states. In short, stop micromanaging is what they want. Second issue is the impact on state autonomy. So who is the real boss here is the big question. One MP said that, or rather accused the bill of turning the Election Commission, the ECI, into the new Superman of Indian democracy. Excessive powers for the ECI. And then he asked, is this a bill or some election takeover notice? In fact, Asaduddin Owaisi from the AIMIM had his own mic drop moment. Shorter assembly terms, like planning some 5-year wedding and kicking everyone out after 2 years. So he uses argument of the violation of the right of self-governance. He claimed that midterm elections are violating the right to self-governance. So maybe he meant that midterm elections are not the jugaad for parliamentary democracy after all. And yes, of course, other parties chipped in, stating that states are not some centers, sidekicks. Federalism means states are not just decorative extras, they have their own script to follow, right? And then the practical and structural issues that flow. So, the government also has been given the lesson in respecting federalism. You can't change the rules of the match without asking the players. Basically, states should have been consulted. What about the consultation with the states? So that was his idea. N.K. Premchandran of RSP, I believe, who stated that states should have been consulted before you drop this bill bomb on them. And then NCP also made their stand crystal clear that center and states are like two parallel tracks. You can't mix their terms and expect smooth train ride. And of course, empowering the ECI to dissolve assemblies is like giving the referee power to end the match whenever they like. So that's also a concern. In short, to summarize, the opposition says that this bill is like those new age diet plans. Sound great in theory, but break everything in practice. Federalism, autonomy, and of course the democratic process. Everything is under threat according to them. So that's their response. Now, how has the government responded? See, the government has said, and of course, whenever you are in doubt in this country, bring the constitution and throw in Ambedkar. That's what we love to do, right? First up, the law minister Arjun Ram Meghwal pulled out this article, of course, 327, which of course provides parliament with the authority to decide on matters of elections. And then he brought in the dangerous union list entry number 72. So union list entry 72 deals with the provisions of elections to parliament, to the state legislatures, and of course to the offices of the president, the VP, and the election commission. So these were his trump cards. He said, using these as the constitutional Uno reverse, that the parliament has full authority to make laws regarding elections, be it the Lok Sabha or the state assemblies, right? So center is not gate crashing a wedding. It's always on the guest list. It's a union list topic. Of course, center has the exclusive power under Article 246 to make laws on matters mentioned in the union list, which includes not just elections to the parliament, but also to state legislatures. Next, Meghwalji also tackled the elephant in the room, the basic structure doctrine. In fact, he assured everyone that the cornerstones of our constitution, things like judicial review, things like federalism, the separation of powers, secularism, the supremacy of constitution, they remain intact. Nothing gets disturbed. It's just some new election calendar. And to back this up, he brought out the ultimate mic drop quote from Dr. Ambedkar that federalism divides powers not through any central law but by the constitution itself. So this was it, and of course one more bill has been brought. That's the Union Territories Laws Amendment Bill. So this bill has been brought to just extend or rather implement similar provisions for the three UTs of Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir, and Puducherry. Just an extension of the simultaneous elections to these three UTs as well. So finally, the bill has been referred to a joint parliamentary committee. The bill is off to a JPC for now at least, like some blockbuster movie waiting for its next trailer. So will it pass the Lok Sabha special majority? Can it survive the Rajya Sabha pressure test? Well, my dear innocent aspirants, in this political thriller, interval abhi baki hai. So stay tuned for more twists, more turns, and breaking news tamasha. And that's all for this video. Remember, elections are not just about voting. They're about making sure the steering wheel of democracy stays firmly in our hands. Whether it's one election or five, don't forget to vote, because a silent citizen is every politician's dream come true. Stay informed, stay curious, and most importantly, be the noise that keeps democracy awake. Jai Hind.